Excellent. That sounds like it's now recording. So hello everyone, and welcome to the third webinar of the Dakhleh Oasis projects series from the sands of the Sahara, the archaeology of Egypt's Dakhleh Oasis, and the last one of the year. So if you've been with us for the last two, welcome back. My name is Jorge Coelho de Jesus. I have an MA in Egyptology from the University of Manchester, and I'm very happy to be moderating today's webinar. Please note, as always, and as you've just heard, that the webinar is indeed being recorded. So do make sure that I'll remind you of this in a bit, but do make sure that your microphones and videos are off for the duration, at least until the Q&A of this webinar. Now, for those of you who don't know, and I don't suspect there are many of you here who don't know, but for those of you who don't know, the Dakhleh Oasis project is an important initiative that has been carrying out research in Egypt's western deserts since 1978. Its various constituent projects undertake vital archaeological and interdisciplinary work on a vast timescale of Egyptian, wider Mediterranean, and African history. This work covers a wide range of areas from archaeology, Egyptology and classics, to anthropology, zoology, and geophysics, to name but a few. The interdisciplinary approach is very much at the heart of the DOP. Now, the purpose of the DOP's webinar series is very much twofold. First and foremost, it seeks and has sought to present to the wider public fascinating information about the discoveries that have been made over the years in the Dakhleh Oasis and about life in the oasis. And secondly, the webinar series is connected to our crowdfunding campaign towards a better future. In the past, the DOP has relied on participating expeditions for its operation. However, with no fieldwork being allowed in recent years, the DOP has become solely reliant on private resources. Now, this means that over 40 years of research and promising studies are unfortunately at risk due to rising costs. In the face of this situation, the proceeds from this webinar series will go directly towards the crowdfunding campaign, which will support the maintenance of the DOP's dig house and the publication of research. And I will put the link to the campaign in the chat. Do feel free to have a look and share. So now we move on to the main event, which is not me and far from being me, but our webinar. Early Christianity in the Dakhleh Oasis and its role in Egyptian church history by Gillian E. Bowen. Now, Gillian E. Bowen is Adjunct Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Ancient Cultures at Monash University. She is, and let me see if I get this right, and Gillian, correct me if I get this wrong. She is Director of Excavations at Kellis and Deir Bumatta, Deputy Director at Mut al-Kharab, numismatist for the Dakhleh Oasis project. Did I get that right? Was that correct?
You did indeed.
Excellent, very happy. So her research focuses upon the archaeology of early Christianity in Egypt, and she has excavated 4 4th century churches, including those at Kellis, which we'll be hearing about today. Now, before we start, just a few quick housekeeping rules. The lecture will last approximately 50 minutes, after which time we will have a Q&A session. You can add your questions in the chat, and I'll then read them out to facilitate the Q&A. As I said before, please keep your microphone and your video off during the presentation. And for those social media savvy amongst you, do feel free to tweet and post on Facebook and X, Twitter, about the webinar. Our Twitter handle is at EgyptDOP, and you can use the hashtag DOP webinars. So yeah, that's it. So without further ado, Gillian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, George. And hello, everyone who's joining us this evening. We are actually recording from Dakhleh itself, from our dig house. I've called this lecture Early Christianity, and I thought that before I begin, I need to contextualize the talk and also define what I mean about early Christianity, particularly the early. So here we go. Okay, now in the first 3 centuries of the Common Era, the practice of Christian worship was illegal throughout the Roman Empire, although largely it was tolerated. But in 202 to 203, under the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus, a persecution broke out in Alexandria. And Christians were quite heavily persecuted as far as we understand. It appears to be brief, but it seems to have been extremely effective. But in the middle of the 3rd century, the authorities clearly became concerned with the number of Christians, number of people converting to Christianity. So there were growing numbers. And as Roman law declared it illegal, another persecution broke out, and that was declared, I should say, and that was in 257 to 260, and it was under the emperors Valerian and Decius. Things seemed to be calm for a while, but then in 303, under the Emperor Diocletian and his co-emperor Galerius, yet another persecution broke out. And this was quite an intense persecution. Now, the Roman Empire was in somewhat of turmoil at the time, and there was there were emperors or other contenders vying for the throne. And in 313, Constantine was successful, and he began ruling with his co-emperor Licinius. And in 313, they legitimized Christianity. Now, if I can go on, we know from literary sources.
Sorry, I'm just going to pause you at that. I was waiting for the first slide to be done.
Okay.
There is still an echo.
Yes, I can hear it.
Yes, so I thought before we proceed, best to deal with the echo so that we can hear the rest of your presentation even more smoothly. Now, I'm not sure where the source of the echo is currently coming from. My guess might be Colin's device, seeing as there are 2 devices in the same room. So
mine.
No. So it would be best maybe if Colin, I'm not sure if any sound is coming from his device, but if he could mute completely his device or log out of the presentation, he can sort of, as I said, assist it live, which none of us can, sadly, so far away from Dakhleh. But that might be the source of the echo.
Okay. Yeah. Just hold on a second.
No worries.
Just hold on a second. I'm told that my internet is unstable.
That's all right. Can you speak now?
Yes, that sounds better, doesn't it?
Perfect. No echo. Right. Sorry to have interrupted you. The floor is yours again.
Not a problem at all. And so Christianity was legitimized in 313. And so early Christianity, which is what I want to talk about, and this is within an archaeological context, this is understood to be spanning the 4th century. So if I could just make that clear. Now, we know from literary sources that Christians had reached Alexandria as early as the 2nd century, probably much earlier than that. And Alexandria, of course, was the cultural capital of the Roman Empire. But by the opening of the 3rd century, a school that taught philosophy, Christian philosophy and theology, was operating in the city. And we know also from literary sources that there was a patriarch. Clement of Alexandria, who I've got an image of on the screen, he belonged to this school. He was, of course, one of the church fathers, and he was a convert. And we know that he actually taught there in the early 3rd century. But what I'm interested in particularly is how long it took Christianity to actually reach the Cora, reach into Egypt proper. And so if we can have a look at that. Now, when I began researching early Christianity in Egypt, there were two schools of thought. One was that it was very rapid. Egypt was Christianized pretty rapidly, and that 80% of the people were Christians by the end of the 4th century. And the other school of thought was that it was slow to take off, and it didn't really take hold until the 5th century. And architectural historians who were looking at this dated purpose-built churches from the 5th century. They argued that there couldn't have been any in the 4th century. So that's where we stand. Now, how do they determine whether Christianity had spread into Egypt proper? First of all, what they were looking at was documentation, papyrus documents. And the papyrus documents that they were looking for, of course, were those which are notably Christian, such as biblical papyri with biblical themes, and also typical Christian themes, and also documentary papyri.
I don't think it works. Just a moment.
Okay.
One moment.
Yeah.
Could you give them to me again?
I'd ask people to please mute their microphones as the presentation is taking place, please. Gillian, please continue.
Okay, right. So what they were looking for on these papyri, of course, were biblical passages and also known works of Christians. But the problem here is, of course, that they're not dated. Now, the other papyri that they were looking for were documentary papyri. In other words, administrative, and these may have they'd have perhaps reference to Christians, also personal letters, and these they were looking for within a Christian context. Now, of the biblical papyri, the earliest one that we have, or at least we had in the 1990s, was the one that I've got up on the screen at the moment. And this is Papyrus Rylands 52, and it's the earliest known one. And it's written on the verso and the recto, both sides, and it's dated paleographically, that is by the handwriting, or was by the editor, to 125 to 175, around that particular time. But more recently, it has been redated, and now the people who've looked at it, the papyrologists who've looked at it, have concluded that it's late 2nd or early 3rd century. We don't know where the papyrus came from. We know it was purchased. It was obtained by Grenfell. But as I said, the provenance is unknown. So that's a problem. Now, incidentally, there are 11 papyri that have been dated to the 3rd century. That's all they have, and these are biblical papyri. If we go on to the documentary papyri, we have a real problem there, because if there's persecution, you're not going to write in a papyrus, in a document, that you are Christian. And so how do you determine who was Christian? And the earliest that they have of those, and this is documents with Christian names, the earliest they have is dated to 264 to 282. So a major problem. What else can we find of early Christianity in Egypt? Well, of course, there are grave stealer. But like so many of the biblical, or all of the biblical texts, they are undated. So this is the situation that we find ourselves in. So what I'd like to do now is look at Dakhleh Oasis and what it can contribute or has contributed to the study of early Christianity. I am assuming that everyone is aware of where Dakhleh Oasis is, 800 kilometers southwest of Cairo, approximately, and in Egypt's Western Desert. I've put on a map here of Dakhleh Oasis. And the Dakhleh Oasis project members, under the directorship of Tony Mills, began to survey the oasis in 1978. And they began in the west of the oasis, and they moved progressively to the east. Now, in 1982, they actually started to survey Kelis. It's Ismant el Harab, and we now know it to be ancient Kelis, and you can see it there on the screen. From 1986, excavation began in earnest at Kelis under the directorship of Colin Hope. Just show you a slide of Kelis. It's an extremely well-preserved site, and you can see it there. Just looking across the ruins of Kelis. The site itself has two temples, and it has three churches and two Christian cemeteries. Now, the ceramic assemblage indicated that occupation spanned the first 4 centuries of the Common Era, but there was no indication whatsoever of any 5th century activity at the site. And this is important because what happens is that the village spans that transitional period from the decline of the traditional religion to the adoption by the villagers of Christianity. It's also produced, apart from the churches and the cemeteries, it's produced a wealth of documentary evidence written by and to the Christian community in the village. And as I mentioned, the site is not only extremely well preserved, but it is also well dated. And so this has an enormous amount of information to offer us on early Christianity, both from an archaeological and from a textual point of view. Now, the publication of the Kelis churches has actually forced a redating of the churches in Egypt, and it's now generally accepted that the new religion had made a significant impact on the landscape in the years following the Edict of Toleration in 311. So what I want to do now is have a look at Kelis, and I'll have a look at it in 3 sections. First of all, the architecture and what that tells us of early Christianity, then the burial practices, and finally the community, and we'll look at the documents there. So here's the plan of Kelis, and as you can see, as I mentioned, 3 churches. There are 2 churches here, the East Church, these churches, and they're outlined in red. And then we have a West Church over here, again outlined in red. And the other area that I'm going to be discussing are the houses where the documents were found. And this is a group of 3 houses, particularly in this area, as you can see, and they have produced a wealth of information. There's another house over here, which has also produced an enormous amount of documentary evidence. So those are the ones that we're going to be focusing on. Now, the first church, the earliest of these 3 churches, is the Small East Church. And the Small East Church is actually dated by numismatic evidence. And we know that it was developed as a church sometime after 308. So that is before the Edict of Toleration. So as I said, this is numismatic evidence. It's a pre-existing building. You can see it here, pre-existing building, and it was converted for worship, for Christian worship. The beauty of this is that it actually has the earliest surviving ecclesiastical paintings in Egypt, and you can see some of them there. The church is oriented east-west, as are all of the churches, with a sanctuary in the east. And as you can see by this, the apse itself is decorated, as is the facade. And so I'll just show you some of the decoration. Here it is, the facade. And a lot of it, as you can see, is geometrical, or some of it is geometrical. But you can also see that there is a column, a half column here, and painted columns either side. There are also these two large rectangles, two niches. But what you've got in these rectangles, right in the center, you can just about see it there, is a small crux ansata. Now, the crux ansata, the importance of the crux ansata within the Christian world, or Christian Egypt, is that the Christians actually took the ankh, the symbol of life, and they converted the loop into a circle, as you can see in the one that I've put in the center. And it means, we believe, everlasting life, or the life everlasting. And so that is really important, because as far as we know, it is the earliest representation to survive of the crux ansata. And there's one on this panel on the northern side, and another one on the southern side. Now, the Christians must, or the community must have developed or converted, let's say, to Christianity rather rapidly, because fairly soon after this church was converted, this building was converted, another church was built, and this is a purpose-built church, and it was built quite close. You can see it here, you can see them in relation to one another. Sorry, go back. The church is very interesting. The degree of preservation, sorry, I've done it again. The degree of preservation over here is at least 6 meters, and it's filled with sand, and so we haven't excavated that area. But the entry is somewhat convoluted. You come along here, somehow you get into this room, then you can come through 2 of the doors there, and we've got 3 main rooms which go into the church. The central one, the main one, a north one, and a south one. And the south one seems to have served these rooms, and they seem to be service rooms. Room 4 here is a kitchen. But what you see again is the typical plan of a church, and you have it east-west oriented, apse at the east, and 2 side rooms. They're referred to as pastoforia. And you can see here that there's an ambulatory all the way around the nave, and the nave was paved. This is a view of the church. And again, this has been dated on numismatic evidence, and quite some numismatic evidence, to before the death of Constantine, pre-337, and it was probably built in the first quarter of the 4th century, which of course is extremely important. Just show you a couple of shots of the excavation of the church, really. And as you can see here, all of the collapse. But amongst the collapse, we actually have the capitals, so we know exactly what the capitals looked like, the columns looked like. And another one. This is once it's been cleared, and you can actually see, looking over from here, you can see the smallest church right up here. But you can get some idea here of the depth of preservation, the amount, the preservation, but also the depth of sand up here, which has, of course, preserved the church in the condition that we have it. Just another shot of it, looking in the opposite direction. Now, it's really important in relation to what it tells us about early Christian architecture, because that eastern aisle and the tripart sanctuary with the apse and those flanking pastoforia were previously thought to be of Syrian tradition, but now, of course, they're regarded as an independent Egyptian tradition. So that's a significant contribution, first of all, that it makes. But also the arch over the apse was thought to be 5th century development, and all three of the Kellis churches confirm that it was part of the Egyptian ecclesiastical architecture 100 years before it was previously thought to be. So again, a major contribution to the development of architecture, of church architecture. Again, the paintings, wall paintings, survive. We don't have too many of them. We don't have any of them in situ. They've all been found in the debris. And it looks very much as though the facade, well, we're certain, the apse itself and the facade of the church were actually decorated. And what you see in the top here, the capitals, some of the decoration, this is a line drawing, and you can see they represent vines. And of course, Christ was thought to be the true vine. And so that ties in well with a Christian context. These pieces here are part of the arch. And so we know for absolute certain that it was arched. A couple of other paintings, and the one on the left, the crux ansata, was probably, we're almost certain, that it was on the facade on the southern side of the apse. And again, this crux ansata is quite an elaborate one, and I have to thank Olaf Kappa for putting that together for me. Thank you, Olaf. I saw your name there. He put it together from the various pieces that were retrieved. The one on the right, it took quite a while to work out what that was. We had it upside down. We had it in every position we could think of. And then we realized that it's actually a female figure. And you can see here the neck. Now, these figurines, were actually placed in later churches within the cupula itself. So it looks very much as though we have, well, we definitely have the earliest surviving, well-dated, figurative decoration within the church. So that's another plus for Kellis. If we can move on now to the West Church, and the West Church is something quite different. As you can see, it's not as well preserved as the other churches. I have it in plan at the in the bottom right corner, as you can see. And you have the main room, the main church itself, and you have the access room. And these access rooms are where the catechumens, these are the people who have not yet been baptized into Christianity, have to wait and listen to the service outside of the main church. But what is interesting also about this is that it has a series of rooms to the south. It has a series of 7 rooms. Sorry, Pavel has just arrived. Okay, I'll just go on from there. Sorry, just bear with me for a second. Okay, and so it has this series of rooms to the south, and we have no idea what the function of those rooms were. The central courtyard, it has stabling area for donkeys and other animals. And as I said, we don't know how it relates to the church. The church can be dated again on numismatic evidence to the mid-4th century, around that time. And this is just a shot of those rooms to the south. And you can see the south is far better preserved than it is on the north. But what we found, I was going to say a few years ago, but I think it was, we found in front of the apse what we thought was a wall. But excavating it, we realized that it was a grave. And there are 2 graves in front of the apse. And this clearly identifies it as a funerary church. Now, this is important because burials were never allowed inside the settlement. And this is, as far as we understand, the earliest funerary church. What we also have to the east is a small cemetery that had developed. And you can see here, there are only 9 graves in it, but you can see here the enclosure. The burials within the church, you think, okay, burials in the church, maybe it's someone important. One is a young man, about 28, and the other is an infant. So interesting. The ones in the cemetery itself are, I think there are 9. I think there are 5 women and 4 men. And here are a couple of the graves, and these are the graves of the women. And you can see in the top right there, the 2 women who were buried here. The burials, you can see the 2 small mastabas that covered the burials. They're pit graves. The Egyptians, the Christians buried their deceased in pit graves. And of course, the Christians believed in the resurrection of the body. And so this would take place on the day that the Son of Man returned to earth. And the graves are cut in an east-west direction. They're all east-west oriented. And the heads are placed to the west. The whole idea is that when the Son of Man returns, he will come from the east. And the people will stand up and they can follow him. Christian burials also, part of the Christian burial practice, is that they are, as I said, simple pit graves, and they are devoid of any grave goods. And another feature is, I'm coming to that in a few minutes. Burial of fetuses and newborns on the north of the site, and we call this the Kellis II Cemetery, and it is the main Christian burial ground. And so what I've got on the plan here, which was drawn by Lana Williams, is the excavated section of the cemetery. The cemetery is estimated to contain between 3,500 and 4,000 graves, and almost, I'm trying to think, I think it's about 760 odd have been excavated. What you can also see there are tomb chapels, really, and burials within the tomb chapels. And there are 13 of those. I know Peter and Tosha talked about this in the last webinar, so I'm not going to say too much about it. Some of the pit graves, and I have to thank Peter Sheldrick for the photographs here. What you can see are just simple pit graves. There is the burial there of a newborn baby, and you can see how it's wrapped, placed on the ground. And then you have some more elaborate structures, but they're still fairly simple. And you can see the vaulted substructure and then a superstructure. And that superstructure would probably have looked like those mastaba ones, or those 2 that were in the other cemetery. As I said, the hallmark is the east-west burials and so on and so forth, but also this careful burial of fetuses. And Peter will probably correct me here, but I've got a feeling there's 1 about 28 weeks or something like that, but also infants. There are very few coffins. They're at a premium, but there are a few. I think about half a dozen, and you can see them here. They're pottery coffins. But what is really interesting in relation to this is, I don't know how well you can see it, particularly in this one, the deceased was placed on a bed of rosemary and also covered with rosemary. Now, this seems to be unique to Kellis. I have contacted Françoise Dunon, who has excavated many Christian burials in Karga, and I've also contacted other people who have excavated Christian burials, and no one is aware of rosemary being placed inside the coffins. But they not only come in coffins, often there will be a scattering of rosemary just in the simple pit graves too. So we really don't know why. It was clearly grown locally, and there was clearly a lot of it because there are masses in some of these burials. So why? We really don't know. Some of the graves were protected, and as you can see here on the left, large pots. The cemetery is relatively close to Columbaria, and what you have here are large pigeon pots. And whoever buried this little one, this fetus, has chosen to place the body, as you can see, into a pot for added protection. And we're assuming no religious significance to placing the pots in the graves, simply for protection from animals who might dig them up. The tomb enclosures, I just show you a plan of them here, because although Christian burials are all rather simple, some a little bit more elaborate than others, there is clearly a status differentiation because some of them were buried in these tombs, family tombs, we believe. But if you notice how the graves are clustered around the outside of them, and a lot of them, these graves on the outside, are those of children. So there seemed to be some prestige in being buried as close as possible to whomever was buried within the tomb enclosures. And this is a shot of Tomb 4, a photograph, just looking at the tomb itself and the graves that are actually surrounding it. Ages of death, which I got from Tosha, of the 683 bodies examined by the bioarchaeologists. Just have a look at the number of fetuses and those from birth to 12 months. And of course, this just indicates the infant death rate. And I would imagine, I haven't confirmed with Tosha or Peter, but I'm pretty sure that within this 16 to 35 age group, you will also have females who have died in childbirth. Interestingly, and I'm pretty sure Peter and Tosha would have talked about this, the diseases and trauma, children, brittle bones, bone infection, dental disease, leukemia and fractures. And with the adults, osteoarthritis, spina bifida, tuberculosis, leprosy, which apparently is extremely interesting. And I was in discussion with our bioarchaeologists, and apparently there are 22 cases of leprosy have been found, and that seems to be extreme. There's cancer, including breast cancer, fractures, dental cavities, as one would expect, and abscesses, of course. So what I'd like to do now is to move on to the documents. And as I said, the documents derive from the houses, and we have 3 particular ones. They're contiguous, but the majority of documents were found in House 3. So this is a shot of House 3, and you can see the rear courtyard and the main rooms over here. And that's what the amount of material remains left behind was just phenomenal. And this is just room 6. And the floor was absolutely littered, as you can see, with artifacts. As you can see, pottery galore, and I think an estimated 200 vessels can be reconstructed just from this single room. And I suppose the room is part of this courtyard, maybe 4 by 4 meters, but wouldn't be any larger than that. But also amongst these pots, and also there is some basketry with the papyrus documents. And so they'd clearly been archived, and they must have fallen in from shelves or from the roof when the roof collapsed. So the documents. Now, back in 1986, when Colin first excavated, this was one of the first of the finds that was identified as Christian. And it's an amulet. It's written in Greek. It was found in, you've got the 3 houses, and directly behind house 1 is another structure. And this is where it was found, in structure 4. And this is a Manichaean amulet. And I'll talk about the Manichaeans in a short time. But the wealth of documentary evidence that we have from this site is just amazing. And as you can see, from right to left, from left to right, we have documents written on papyrus, the wooden board in the middle there. And this is amazing. We have so many wooden boards from the site, which are used as codices, as books. And the discoveries at Kellis have increased the number of wooden books or wooden leaves, let's say, from books by 80%. So another major plus for Kellis. You can see some others. And here you actually have 2 letters that are unopened. An interesting one on the left is the Kellis Agricultural Account Book, which covers a period of 4 years. But particularly interesting from my point of view, on the top of it is the Greek lettering Chi Mu Gamma. We think it means Christ born of Mary. There have been some other interpretations of that, but it clearly identifies the writer of this as Christian. Okay, so about the dated documents that we have related to Christians from Kellis. Now, the earliest, which actually is securely dated, dates to 337, and it mentions Aurelius Harpocrates, as you can see, and he's a priest of the Catholic Church. Now, Catholic in this sense is universal, so the universal church. By 352, we have record of a deacon and a priest of the Catholic Church. We have the term Pantocrator Theos, and this is the earliest attested term prior to, because prior to this discovery, it was thought to derive from the earliest, was the 5th century, 408 to 423. So again, 70 odd years. 355, Aurelius Valerius, he manumitted his slave because of his zeal of Christianity. And then in 364, we have an Aurelius Jacob, and again, a priest of the Catholic Church. 360s or 370s, we have a bishop mentioned and also priests in the Kellis Agricultural Account Book. Okay, so who are these Manichaeans? Manichaeans are Christian Gnostics, and they were obviously resident in houses 2 and 3, and no doubt in house 1, 2. They form a block. The religion was founded by Mani in Persia in the mid-3rd century, and Mani sent missionaries far and wide, east, west, and south, and they seem to have arrived in Egypt around the, I think Ian is thinking the 260s to 280s. this group was heavily persecuted under Diocletian, and this persecution continued beyond Diocletian's. They're a sect, and they believe themselves to be the true Christians. Now, the Manichaean scriptures, Mani's work, was written in Syriac, and we know from the documents that were found at Kellis that some of this Syriac was translated into Greek and Coptic. So that is in the village itself. These people were literate. And moreover, this is the only known Manichaean community from antiquity. We just don't have another. So another plus for Kellis. But Kellis wasn't the only place that the Christians moved to. We've got this small hamlet of Kellis, well, probably not so small. It's called Aina Sabil, and it has a church. And this was excavated by the SCA inspectors. And I thank Kamal Bayoumi for the permission to reproduce the photograph. But again, it's dated on numismatic evidence to the 4th century. Now, as I said, it's a hamlet of Kellis. So by this time, the Christians are moving into the hamlets as well. Ain al-Gadida, again, I think it's about 6 kilometers from Kellis. This was excavated by Nicola Aravecchia under the direction of Roger Bagnall, and again dates to the 4th century. You can see on the east the apse that's been added, and it was a pre-existing building that was, again, transformed for Christian worship. Another one at Amhida, and this is a small 4th century funerary church. It has a crypt and it has several bodies in the crypt. This, again, indicates that by the 4th century, Christians were actually burying their dead within the settlement, because the Christians were believed not to be dead, but to be sleeping, just waiting for the day of resurrection. And this is just a small one from Amhida, and they're obviously a major church at Amhida, but it hasn't been discovered as yet. Deir Abu Meta, this is a triconch church, and it's a very interesting church. Triconch means it has these 3 apses. Now, it's one of only 6 known triconches in Egypt. And the prototype for triconch churches was thought to be the White Monastery Basilica in Sohag, and that is dated on an inscription to the mid-5th century. Deir Abu Meta, as I said, there are 5 other triconch churches, and so architectural historians said, okay, well, the White Monastery Basilica is the earliest, therefore the others must be later. And they dated Deir Abu Meta to the 6th century. But we've been fortunate enough to have some dates, some C14 dates, and they indicate that the triconch was built in the mid to late 4th century. And so what this means is it's necessary to reevaluate the dates of the other Christian triconch churches, and not only in Egypt, because there are a few outside of Egypt as well, and the earliest is thought to be 400. So another plus for Dakhleh. Mothus, Mut al-Harab, was the capital in the 4th century, and we know there was a bishop there. We also know that there was a church, but there were probably several churches there. All we have from there are these fragments. You can see the top left. It's an inscribed lintel, and it says something like, I think, Christians of God go forth. The other one mentions Christians, and these are typical sandstone decorative blocks, clearly from that church. We were looking at the site just a few days ago, and we found far more columns. They've been exposed during our absence, and they clearly belonged to one of the churches. Fred Lemerhaus was working at El Casa, and he went into the old mosque, looked at the old mosque, studied that, and the orientation indicates that it was built above a church. So we've got another one there, date unknown. And so what I've just put up here for you are the location of the 8 known churches, which date to the 4th century. And others must have been located at Ain Babia in the east, and also at Tanida. These are large sites. And so what I think we can conclude from that was, by the end of the 4th century, the oasites were well and truly Christianized. And during the survey, these are the sites in Dakhleh with churches, Christian cemeteries, and ceramics dating to the from the 4th to the 7th century. And 87 sites have been identified between 300 and 700 CE. And at that, I will leave you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gillian, for the really fascinating presentation, a lot of thought-provoking insights into the lives and diversity, really, of the early Christian community in the Dakhleh Oasis. And I think it really highlighted the need for the possibility to do more work in Dakhleh.
Yes.
To take this research forward. And also you've highlighted at various points the impacts that the discoveries that Dakhleh have had on the need to also reevaluate other sites elsewhere in Egypt. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the great presentation. So we'll kickstart our Q&A. If anybody has any questions, please do place them in the chat, and I'll read them out, as well as, of course, who they are from. So I'll keep an eye on the chat, and until we get any questions from the chat, maybe I'll kickstart with a question that I have. Maybe you could tell us what we know, if anything at all, about the interactions between the Christians at Kellis and those of maybe elsewhere in the Oasis and the Nile Valley and the Delta. Do we have what picture do we have of the place of Kellis Christians in early Christian Egypt?
Yes. Well, we know they were going to and from Trimithis. We know that whoever was living in that Kellis agricultural account book, actually the landlord, I have to just stop and think about this, but their connections there are from Hibis in Karga Oasis, of course. And we also know that residents in that house 3 had property in Hibis. They had property in the Nile Valley, and they were going to and from the Nile Valley constantly. And we have letters to and from, to and from people within the Nile Valley. Yes, and so, sorry?
Tell us the same people at Kellis. Kellis and Zabil and Ampida, same people.
Oh, yeah. Colin's just reminding me that Aina Zabil, and that's that small hamlet about a kilometre and a half from Kellis, and also Trimithis, which is modern Amhida, which is, I think, about 30 k's away. The same people are travelling to and fro. We have that from the Ostraka, and so that's particularly interesting. But what is also interesting, and I forgot to mention this, I don't know how my time's going, but with these Manichaeans, they have 12 elect. Now that is 12 elect for the north, south, east, and west, if you like, the whole of the area that they proselytized. One of the teachers was in Egypt, referred to as the teacher, and we know that one of the people in House 3 had sent his son to the teacher, and they were going up to Alexandria, and he was learning Latin from the teacher to spread the word. And so this is a really important community, for the Manichaeans. Sorry, I veered off the question there.
No, but that's fascinating also because, I mean, as you were talking, the fact that either this translation that you were talking about was taking place at Kellis, or at least that
Yes.
they had so the knowledge of all these different languages. Man, it's quite a connected and
Yeah,
cosmopolitan really community.
yeah, absolutely. These are educated people. These people were reading Homer. And along with the Kellis Agricultural Account book, there was also another book found, and this was Isocrates' Cyprian Oration. And it's the earliest known copy. I think the next one is about 12th century medieval, something like that. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah, perfect.
And you don't expect it for a village.
Yep, indeed, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excellent. So I see there are questions in the chat, which is great. It's very good. So forgive me if I butcher your name. For context, I was brought up in the UK and therefore sometimes have an issue with names. So from Paul Kieniewicz, two questions very much connected. Are there any Manichaean churches found at Kellis? And did the Christians and Manichaeans get along? And I'll add to that as well. Did the Christians and non-Christians, do we have any evidence if they got along?
Okay. No Manichaean church found in Kellis that we can identify. We've got these three churches, and if you look at the other churches, they fit within a let's say an Orthodox context. So no, we can't say that any of the churches are Manichaean. Definitely not. And the other question, how did they get on? They don't seem to have had any problems. It's very difficult to tell who was Orthodox Christian, if you like, members of the institutional church, because we have more documents of Manichaeans than we do of the Orthodox. And that's probably because of where we've excavated in House 3, and this is where we found a wealth of them. But from House 4, we do have these few that are the let's just call them Orthodox, and so there seems to have been no problem. They're probably all interrelated. A lot of them are probably interrelated, but we do have one document, and I think it's dated 335, and it lists a whole lot of people, and I think it's a petition, but it includes Christians, we know by the Christian names, but it also includes Stonios, who is a priest of Tutu. And so that is the traditional religion. And they all seem to be functioning quite well together, as far as we can determine.
Perfect. Excellent. Very good. Thank you very much. Moving on then to the next question. Martin has three questions. The first is about pottery analysis. Martin Savicki, were there analyses of content on pottery found in churches made? So has this pottery been analyzed? Martin is particularly interested in data on wine, which so am I, just generally speaking in life, and psychoactive substances. So maybe we'll deal with that question first before we move on to his other question.
There's no evidence for psychoactive drugs. And no, we haven't analysed many of the contents because there's very rarely anything.
Okay.
And in terms of wine,
yes,
we can identify the wine vessels because of the resin on the interior of jars coming in from the Nile Valley. That's all we can say.
Okay. Wine, we can recognise that from the resin of the interior of the pots, and it's coming in from the Nile Valley. There is nothing, the vessels that we found from the church, there's just nothing inside of them. So we can't really say anything about that. And no evidence of psychedelic drugs as far as I know.
Okay, fair enough. Martin's second question, what is the etymology of the place name Kellis?
We don't know. We have no idea.
Fair enough.
Yep, sorry.
No, that's good. Yeah. That's something else to research in the future. There we go. All these avenues of research at Kellis. That's what makes the site so rich. And the third question, how long are Manichaeans attested at Kellis? I guess
again we're uncertain. because most of the documents are in Coptic, and of course the Coptic texts are not dated. And so we don't know. Ian Gardner, who is studying the texts, is speculating from probably, I think, not speculating, but estimates from, I think, around 340s. And the last dated text that we have from the site, and this comes from House 3, and we assume the Manichaeans are still there, is 386. No, 393 is from another. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And Kellis, incidentally, was abandoned, as far as we can understand, largely abandoned at the end of the 4th century. So where they went, we don't know.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. I'll ask maybe one more question while we wait to see if anybody else has any questions. But this crux ansata,
Yeah.
what more can you maybe tell us about it? Is it I suspect it's attested elsewhere, not just at
Oh yeah, yes,
Kellis.
yes.
Is it a common motif throughout Egypt?
It seems to be a Christian motif. Bagawat in Dakhleh Oasis, that's a very large Christian cemetery. Lots of wall paintings there, and they have crux ansata in several of their the tombs, the tomb chapels there. But you'll also find it on gravestones, lots of gravestones. Yeah, yeah. So it's common. And I mean, it's obvious the ankh, the symbol of life in ancient Egypt. Very easy to modify that, if you like, for eternal life.
Yeah, perfect. I did have one last, and if anybody wants to ask any more questions, do put them quickly in the chat. And if I see them in the next 2 minutes, then I'll ask them. Otherwise, you're welcome to maybe, I don't know, email them over to us, and we'll see if we can answer them afterwards at any point. My last question, I suspect, I mean, you've said we unfortunately don't know much about it. I'm personally quite fascinated about these rosemary
I know, so am I.
You know, if there's any symbolism behind them, or you know, are there precedents? It's
no idea whatsoever. Françoise Dunant tells me at Douche that there was a bouquet in one of the tombs there, and it included myrtle and a few sprigs of rosemary, but nothing like what we're getting at Kellis. It's just unbelievable. I know rosemary, you know, in modern times means remembrance, but I have no idea what it meant in ancient times. I've asked Ursula Tannhäuser, our archaeobotanist, and she knows nothing about the use of rosemary in antiquity, other than it being a herb, but not within a funerary context. So, no, I'd love to know.
yeah. No, well, there you go. Another venue for research.
Another one.
Avenue for research. I mean, yes, it's yes, no, it's fascinating. So Martin has a follow-up question to the second question, and I'll read it out. Martin lives in Ireland near early Christians.
A Celtic cross
site named Kellis, established in the early 6th century, and in the medieval period, it was referred to as Kellis. Martin wonders if there may be any connection. There are connections between early Christians in Ireland, like Fadamore, Psalter.
Well, St. Patrick was said to have gone to Egypt.
Yeah.
And the Celtic cross is very similar to the crux ansata. And I think that's all I can really say about that. Sorry, Martin. That's the best I can do.
I have to say that leaves our webinar in a massive cliffhanger, making us want to know so much more, and really hoping that there's a possibility for research on all these fronts, because
Indeed,
because there are so many questions still left to answer. It's fascinating. Well, I don't think there are any more questions. So yeah, thank you very much, Gillian, for the amazing lecture, and for really presenting this material to us. I'd like to thank everybody on behalf of DOP for attending the webinar. as for what comes next, do keep an eye on our social media accounts, both on X and Facebook. And do consider, if you're not yet, becoming a friend of the Dakhleh Oasis project, which you can do so on the campaign link, which will be sent around to you after this presentation. And for those of you who are friends, don't forget to renew your friendship, your membership in January. So thank you once again, Gillian, for the amazing presentation. And yeah, I wish everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a Happy New Year. And see you all next year.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
I think there's some vague